As you may know, obviously, I did present my PhD 10 years ago about issues revolving around social housing in England. And over the last 10 years, I haven't fully teach at the university, but I did work as a project manager in urban planning. But meantime, and especially at Sorbonne University, I am considered as an associate professor. So I'm teaching, doing a bit of research, but also working as a professional in the field of urban planning. And that's why I'm here today in front of you. Today, contrary to what perhaps what is written in the program, I've changed just a bit the title of my presentation, and I will present you something within the next hour about the making of the Paris Global City region, which is, for me, is a kind of unspoken dynamic. I say unspoken dynamic because as many matters about urban development, planning, and so on, one of the main weaknesses is the democratic side of urban development. And to say that there's a huge kind of tide in terms of regional planning over the last 10 years, but the population of Île-de-France and Paris region doesn't really know what is happening. So there's a kind of difference between what is carried on by municipalities, state, and so on, and what the population, and the Paris population, especially Paris and regional population, does know about this dynamic. That is why I've called it the unspoken dynamic. I guess I'm in front of people who are not professionals in the field of planning and so on. So that's why I've decided to structure my presentation in 3 parts. And the first one is dedicated especially on the history of the development of the Île-de-France region and the Paris region. And the development of the Région Île-de-France is mainly based on the state intervention. That is what I'm going to show in this first part. In the second part, I didn't translate well the title number 2. What I want to underline with you are the main stakes, the main present stakes in terms of regional development. And I'm gonna say a few words about the issue of public transport, housing development, the supply of new housing, and the relationships between Paris and its suburbs. This is the issue related to the new way of governing this new metropolis. And the third part of my presentation is based on the presentation of 2 development tools. One about real estate, how to support the land, and the second one about a regional development tool which is led by the state. So my presentation is going to focus on those aspects. So am I all right with my speech? Did you grasp more or less what I perhaps want to share with you? Well, I hope so. So to introduce my speech, what I want to underline, first of all, is the fact that Paris is for several centuries several centuries a big global city, a national capital. And this point is very important because apart from Beijing, Istanbul, and Kyoto in the world, there are no other cities with size, history, and equivalent status. Okay? So, over the last 500 years, for instance, apart from Beijing, Istanbul, Kyoto, and Paris, the other cities did increase and did decrease as well. But Paris is, in Europe, very important because it has been, over the last 500 years, one of the main global cities, and still one of the main global cities. And as you may know, perhaps wandering in the streets of Paris, you saw that Paris get the tracks of the times in its street. It has been organized, transformed over the last 2 centuries, and it has been a social and urban model since the 18th century, especially at the time of the lights, which has invented the urban hygiene, and also during the 19th century with the so-called Haussmannisation of Paris. And during the 70s, so now it's been, let's say, 40 or 50 years, Paris and its region did reinvent an urban model based on the deployment of new towns and the development of La Défense area, that you may know also, and the regional express network, the RER, and also Roissy Airport, that you may also have used. And this big development policy, and which is a recent one, has been put forward as a model by many countries. Yet Paris and its region did not commit its transformation at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. Meantime, the world cities, the other world cities, big cities, compete within a global economy, which tends to make them more interdependent to each other, but also rival cities. And at the end of the 20th century, Paris did undergo its history, and which is symbolically translated by the loss of the Olympic Games in 2012 against London. So London did appear as the main and leading global city in Europe, whereas Paris did undergo its history. And on the map that you can show here on the screen, you see that today, but perhaps within the 20 next years, it might be another map that you may have on the screen. London and Paris appeared as the only 2 global cities in Europe. But what should be underlined also is that a kind of rivalry and competition between the 2 main global cities, but the kind of second-ranked cities did also tend to compete with London and Paris. Let's say, for instance, Barcelona, Madrid, 2 or 3 main cities in Germany, obviously. So this new structure of the economy may, in the next 2 decades, transform, obviously, the geography of the main global cities in Europe. So, before 2030, we shall count about 600 cities of more than 10 million inhabitants in the world. And the question is to know if Paris will remain a big European world metropolis, while the urban development, urban transformation of Paris has been put forward during the 70s and 80s. Which kind of model of development did Paris might develop to avoid the decline of the city, and especially compared to its kind of opponent, which is London. And the other question is to know which are the stakes that the Parisian metropolis does confrontate or has to not relieve, but to the stake has to be has to be challenged in a way. And as the issues are implemented in France, are related to France, we have to ask the question of the place of the state within this development of Greater Paris. So that's why my presentation will underline the way that Paris did reorganize its territory over the last 10 years to redefine its place within the national, European, and global and world scales. Yep. At the regional scale, I told you that the region Île-de-France is the kind of product of the action of the state. As a very centralized country, the state did control the development of the region, and especially Paris and its suburbs. So, what I want to show you is different a series of maps. Well, it's not very clear, but anyway, I'm going to underline a few points within 5 minutes. But what you should know is, to understand the present situation, is that the Greater Paris is not a new idea, obviously. And from the end of the 19th century, Paris tends to calm down the demographic pressure of the inner Paris, okay? And from the 19th century, what is important to know is that the suburb does welcome, for instance, the industry, and also many rejected functions that Paris and the center of Paris does not want to welcome any longer, such as hospitals, cemeteries, sewage farms, social housing, and so on. And the link between the suburbs of Paris and the inner center of Paris is from the 19th century to master the demographic pressure of its population, and to put its the kind of bad functions within the suburbs. And at the end of the 19th century and from nowadays, what should be underlined is that the suburbs is split up in very different socially spaces. You got the western part of Paris and its region, very bourgeois areas, okay? And on the north and the east of the metropolis, you got industrial suburbs, farmland and abandoned farmland and so on. And an very important aspect, is that during the inter-World War period, around 500,000 inhabitants in Paris did live and in suburbs with no equipment. This means that they had a kind of they did acquire bad lands to build up by themselves their own houses, but their own houses was not provided by electricity, gas, light, and so on. And at the end of the 20s, this situation became a kind of very big public scandal. And this situation raised two main reactions. A political reaction, and it's a very important one because up to nowadays it's still more or less the situation. So the first reaction is a political one. From the mid-30s, the marriage kind of majority of mayors who led the municipalities of the suburbs were communist mayors, okay? And this is at the beginning of the 30s, it's the start of the so-called red belt of Paris, okay? So you got, let's say, just after the limits of Paris and 10 kilometers from the inner city of Paris, you got Paris surrounded by a kind of red belt, obviously, because it's a communist-led municipalities. So this is the first main and political reaction. And you get a second reaction, which is a technical reaction. And the technical reaction is what I'm going to show you now, is the development of regional planning led by the states. And this is the history of 80 years of strategic and regional planning. So, I told you a couple of words about the scandal of the mal lotis. I mean, those poor people who did build up their own dwelling, but on bad lands, not equipped land. So from the 30s, you got the development of strategic plans, and the first one is the so-called Plan Pro, which aimed to make the suburb much more attractive. It's an answer to the mal loti situation, and which started to develop the motorway network. And then afterwards, and especially after the Second World War, we got the second big strategic plan, which is the Plan d'aménagement et d'organisation de la région Île-de-France, at the very beginning of the 60s, which aimed to contain the development of Paris. And meantime, you got the regional scale, based, focusing on Paris and its region, okay? The goal was to contain the development of Paris. But meantime, at the national scale, the aim was to develop regional cities, okay? Between 10 and 12 regional cities in France to counterbalance the power and the economical and regional and urban power of Paris. Okay. Sorry. But there's a kind of new way of thinking the development in Paris, which appeared a few years afterwards this plan, this strategic plan. From 1965, you got perhaps the most important strategic plan in that the Paris region did know, which is the schéma directeur d'aménagement et d'urbanisme de la région Île-de-France, which, contrary to the plan of the 60s, did not say, well, we want to contain the development of Paris. He said, we want to organize the development of Paris, and to organize it in a sustainable way. First of all, we have to consider that Paris and its region, because of its size, the concentration of activities and power, Paris and its region is the main economical asset, an urban asset of Paris, of France. Okay. So to maintain the standard of this asset, we have to organize its development, and to organize it, we have to create new towns, which is a very important thing. Cergy-Pontoise, Évry, Marne-la-Vallée, Sénart, Saint-Quentin-en-Yvelines are the main new towns in the region of Paris. And we also have to link the new towns to each other, and to link the new towns to Paris, and to link the new towns to the two main airports. Okay? And this is the creation of the regional network transportation system, okay? The RER. And thirdly, this is also the creation of, as many cities in Europe, the Green Belt. Okay, you also have a Green Belt, well, let's say between 10 and 20 kilometers from the center of Paris, which has to aim to protect Paris from an environment point of view. So this strategic plan is a very important one, because it considers that Paris is the main asset of France, okay, and to preserve this asset, its development has to be organized by the implementation of new towns and a very efficient transport system called RER. The last strategic plans are less important. I just want to underline that over the beginning of the 90s, what is put forward by these strategic plans are the social and territorial equality, because, as you may know, Paris and its region is very divided socially, economically, and so on. And the last strategic plan, called SDRIF, schéma directeur de la région Île-de-France, does promote density and capacity, thanks to English urban planners who did influence the last new, the very new strategic plans. Up. Today, perhaps something that you don't know, that the RER has 5 main lines. You may have taken one of these lines, A, B, C, D, E, A, B, C, D, E, A, B, C, D, E. It contains 257 stop points for almost 600 kilometers of rail tracks, which is quite a lot. And it does transport of around almost 3 million travelers per day. The Newton policy has been obviously developed firstly in England at the beginning of the 20th century, and also after the Second World War. But the new towns in France are very different from the new towns in England. But obviously, sometimes they can be compared to each other, and especially because they're conceived as cities which can welcome, obviously, inhabitants, population, but also activities, university, cultural equipment, jobs, and so on. This is why people can live and being accommodated, work in one place, let's say 20 kilometers from the from the center of Paris, okay? And this is this is the way that that many European cities have decided to master the growth of their metropolis. And what I want to show you is that this planning and policy has been a kind of success because between 1975 and 1990, the new towns have welcomed half of the increase of the population of the region, which means 40,000 inhabitants per year between 75 and 90. Meanwhile, the city of Paris, or Paris as a city, did lose 150,000 inhabitants. So on one hand, you got the growth of the suburb, but the growth concentrated in new towns. And meantime, you got loss of population activity in Paris. So this is, for me, this does indicate that the regional growth has been really mastered by the new town policy. But during the last period, over the last 20 years, what we can see is the population being back to the center of the metropolis. Obviously in the center of Paris, but also at the first ring of the city of Paris. Meantime, between 1990 and 2009, the new towns did welcome only 1/6 of the population growth. Alors, Paris and its very close suburbs did welcome a new population because of the policy of brownfield redevelopment. I mean, the former industrial sites have been redeveloped by companies, okay? And also because let's say between in the 70s and the 80s, Paris has suffered from a fairly high rate of vacancy. And during the 90s and the beginning and up to now, let's say up to now, the rate of housing vacancy has decreased a lot. And let's say that today Paris may know a vacancy around 3% of its housing stock, which is very, very few, and which is also a problem. So because of the development of the former industrial sites and because of the shortage of vacancy in Paris and its first ring, the households of the region did come back to the center of the metropolis over the last 20 years. And something very new, this means that the French National Assembly did vote for the creation of a so-called métropole du Grand Paris. Let's say a greater Paris Council. Okay? which does concern the territory in red. Perhaps you may see the red line, okay? And it does account for more than half of the regional population, okay? And this Greater Paris Council does concentrate, obviously, more than half of the population, but the most powerful activities, the university, the leading technology investment, and so on. And this council, this big council, this brand new council, will have powers in terms of housing, planning, and development. Okay, it will develop its powers. Well, not tomorrow, but within 1 or 2 years. Okay, but the territory inside the red line will be governed. Well, actually, should be governed by this new brand new assembly, but which is going very powerful because it will account for half of the population, but mainly because it's the territory of the wealth, finally, of the region. So you see, obviously, an issue of scale between the development of the territory within this red circle and the development of the other part of the region. What we can perhaps say or think or imagine is that the core center of the Île-de-France region, okay, will be led, mastered, organized by a very powerful council, okay? But the big second ring of the region will not be led or governed by an integrated council, but by many municipalities. Okay, so they might have a how is it in English? A two-way development. Well, a very positive, well, let's say a very powerful and positive development in the core of the region, within the core of the region, and a very slow, let's say slow development in the rest of the region. So we might have this risk within the next few years. One positive aspect on this Greater Paris Council is, and it is one of its take, is to redistribute the taxes at the metropolis scale. Because what you have to know today is that municipalities are still very powerful in France and within the regional Île-de-France area. For instance, the municipality have the power on the land. It means that they are making their own local plans, okay? So they say what to build, how to build in their territory. So they are making the local plans. And they are also giving the building permit. No, is it permit? Permis de construire. They say, for instance, they allow people or companies to build houses or whatever. So today, the power on the land is still in the hand of the municipalities. Okay, so municipalities still have a lot of power in France, but they also master the level of taxes that they raise on their territory. Okay? And the level of taxes depends also on the wealth of each municipality. So this map does show, well, roughly, the wealth of each municipality. So if you live in municipalities in dark, you may have more equipment, better schools, and so on, that people who live in municipality in not in dark, but in perhaps in white or in soft color. Okay, so this shows one aspect of inequalities between municipality in Paris and its suburbs. Okay, and the goal, one of the goals of making this Greater Paris Council, okay, is to collect the taxes and to redistribute the taxes in a more equal way. Okay, this is one of the goals, obviously, of this new council, which is to go beyond the municipality selfishness. Up. C'est quoi? Ah, sorry. Tac, tac. This. But what I also want to show you on this map, does show where the waste treatment places are located. Okay, as you may know, that the waste treatment is essential to the functioning of the metropolis, and the limits of the metropolis is still in red. Okay, so the metropolis does concentrate population, wealth, and so on. Okay, but beyond the limits of the metropolis are mainly located services that nobody wants on its ground. Okay, but those services are obviously essential to the way that the metropolis should work out well. Okay, so this means that even if there's, let's say, next year or within the in 2 years, the implementation of a very solid Greater Paris Council, this Greater Paris Council will have to work with the rest of the region, because otherwise the inhabitants who live in the center of the red limits, okay, will not be able to evacuate their waste. Okay, so there will be a game of scales which is going to be very important. And well, today we don't know what is going on, but this kind of maps are very, well, do underline the fact that there are functions which are essential to the good development of the metropolis, which are located beyond its limits. But we have to take account of these services. Oop. Is it all right for you for the moment? Do you grasp what I say? Are there any questions? It's a bit hard for me to speak in English, but anyway, if you have questions for making the aspects clear, is it all right? Okay. Let's go to the second part of my speech, which is going to outline the main stakes that the Île-de-France region and the Greater Paris Council will have to challenge in a way. What you may know is today we are facing two main issues. One is related to the quality of transport, of public transport, and the second one is related to the supply of new dwellings. To say it very quickly and very roughly, it's difficult to commute in Paris and its region, okay, and it's very difficult to live in good conditions in Paris and its region, okay, and those two aspects are very important to take into account at the international scale, because being accommodated in good ways and having the opportunity to move in good conditions very quickly within the metropolis are two assets for, let's say, attract international investment. Okay, and nowadays, because the lack of investment, and especially in the public transport system, we have problems for commuting, for going from one place to another one, and for being accommodated in good conditions. So the first stake is to redevelop the framework, the network of public transport. And let's say 7 years ago, we have a minister of capital city region which has suggested to build a new automatic subway. Okay, you got the subway in orange, that lines in orange. Okay, it is a so-called Big 8. Okay, because it has a shape of a 8, and the aim of this automatic subway is to link the main economical clusters of Paris region, is to link and to have the possibility to go from one cluster to the other one, okay? And those clusters are linked to each other, but also linked to the main stations and the main airport. So this is a territorial model based to a project which put forward the economic growth of the region. Okay, so the region has to be organized around economical clusters, and clusters are roughly specialized urban poles. This project has been highly criticized by the population and political opponents. Okay, and that three main points, aspect of this critique. The first one is to say that there are very limited number of stations, and this very limited number of stations does not meet the real needs of the population. Okay, which is in a way very true. Okay, so it's a lot of money investment for finally deserving economic clusters, but meantime avoiding the population. So, first critique. Second critique is that the clusters, the economical clusters, are not good finally to develop economical innovation. Okay, because innovation is based on the way that businesses did meet with each other, and to meet with each other, to hybrid, they have to be physically very close to each other. So innovation is not created by the fact that clusters specialized in, let's say, cinema, or specialized in research, or but innovation is based on the capacity to provide physical closeness, okay, for businesses. So this is the second main critique. And the third one is the fact that this project does ignore also the need of the population, obviously, but also the reality of the small and medium-sized enterprises in the region. The region is obviously made up by many very dynamic SMEs, okay, and these SMEs are very linked, very integrated to their territory. So if you want to create clusters, economical clusters, we have afterwards. This means that those SMEs have to move in clusters dedicated to their specialization, okay? But it's not possible to do this, it's very difficult. So this was the third main critique of the project. So what has been decided, and decided also by the new national government, because this project was suggested by the former President of the Republic, Nicolas Sarkozy, and now we have a new President of the Republic, François Hollande, and the new government has decided to create a new network, which is called the Grand Paris Express. Okay, so as you can see, as you can notice, there are much more stops, okay? And those stops does not go from one cluster to the one, but they tend to deserve to go in also in excluded territories, mainly the poor territories of the poorest territories of Île-de-France region, okay, which aim to link those territories to the center of Paris and to the other territories of the suburbs, okay. For instance, we will have a new network. This one. Which will surround, let's say, the Greater Paris Council territory, okay? And from today up to 2030, lines will be gradually put into services. And this will, for instance, account for 200 kilometers of new subway, which is a big project, 70 new stations, and which will have as an effect to say that 90% of the population of Île-de-France will live unless 2 kilometers of one of the new stations. This is an important aspect of this new network. And meantime, the works will create up to 2030 more than 20,000 jobs. So, for instance, we're going to start by the southern part of this new tube network. And the important thing, is to show that we're going to start by one of the poor part of the suburb. We're going to follow by one of the poor part also of the suburb of Paris. And then we will try to make the link between the center of Paris and suburbs to suburbs. Up. And this will be a big investment, public investment, obviously, a big project, which obviously will take more than 20 years to be fully implemented, but which is going to be a very interesting one. And it's essential for Paris and the region to keep its attractiveness for population and obviously for investment, international ones, national ones. The second aspect is about housing supply, new housing supply. The main goal of the Île-de-France region is to build around 70,000 dwellings per year, okay, new dwellings per year. Why? Because there's a shortage of housing, and it's not useful to develop the details, but what I want to underline is the difference between the goal, 70,000 dwellings per year to be built, and the reality. From 1975 up to today, what we can notice is, apart from 1975 and 76, we did not build more than 60,000 dwellings per year. Okay? Here. This is the line of the 70,000 dwellings per year. And today, we do build, let's say, 50,000 new dwellings per year. And among those 50,000 dwellings, we have to take into account half of social housing. Okay? So our system of social housing building does sustain the building process. So this is a very important aspect. Our rate of building is still maintained and is based on the fact that the social housing system in France account for, let's say, for Paris and its region, half of the effort. Okay, so this is one of perhaps it's very French that our building sector is supported by the social housing sector, which might not be the case for other countries. Perhaps I should go a bit fast because otherwise we will not have spare time. What I want to show you is that there's a big difference at the regional scale. It's a bit little, sorry. What I want to tell you that there are very big differences in terms of density. Okay, let's say that Paris does know a density of 300 inhabitants per hectare. Hectare. I can't translate it, but perhaps hectare. You see what is an hectare? 300 inhabitants per hectare. Meantime, the department, which is very close to Paris, does welcome between 70 and 100 inhabitants per hectare, which is 3 times less than Paris. So we got a big difference in terms of density. What we should also point out is that there's, over the last 15 years, a huge difference between the increase of individual or household wealth, for instance, here. Over the last 15 years, you got, let's say, a very soft increase of household wealth, but meantime, you got a very powerful increase of housing prices. Okay? This is due partly to the shortage and the lack of housing stock. Okay? But it is also based on the fact that the residential market of Île-de-France has become a very international one. Okay? For instance, many wealthy households from Europe, even from the States, did buy a flat, an apartment in Paris, and this led also to make the prices very high. What I want to show you on this map is 2 things. The first one is where we built the new dwellings in Paris and its region over the last 15 years. We built them, as you can notice, within the Greater Paris Council, within the territory of Greater Paris Council, okay? Here. But mainly, but also above the limits of this new Greater Paris Council, okay? And it is a very important aspect because those households who live above the limits of Greater Paris Council will work within the limits of Greater Paris Council. So there will be also to adjust the effect of scales, okay, between the regional scale and the metropolitan scale, okay, and adjusting those scales is often very difficult to do. So I'm fairly pessimistic for the next few years. And secondly, on this map, what you can also see is that you got the dark color, okay? The dark color shows territories which welcome a fairly high level of equipment. This means hospital, cultural benefits, good schools, and so on. Okay, and the soft color, okay, shows territories where there's a kind of underinvestment in terms of equipment. So we are building nowadays new dwellings in territories or places which are underdeveloped in terms of equipment. So the next issue is to know how to provide services and fairly high standard of equipment to those new households who built the house in these places because it's too expensive, obviously, to be owner-occupied, for instance, within the territory of the Greater Paris Council. Okay? So within perhaps 10 years, there will be a political demand for getting a good standard of equipment. But the question is to know if we will have the money for it. And don't think, and take into considering what's happening nowadays in Europe, I don't think we will have the public investment possibility to equip those underdeveloped territory in a way. Okay. So, and this will become a political issue within the next year. And for instance, we know nowadays that there's a fairly high rate of protest votes in those areas, and especially for the far-right party. So it's going to be a very acute issue, political issue, an urban issue, obviously, but also political issue within the next years. I wanted, obviously, to show you this map, which shows the territorial inequalities in Île-de-France area. The dark colors are the wealthiest areas, whereas the soft colors are the poorest areas. So the positive aspect of the metropolis is that it concerns wealthy and poor areas, which is a fairly, from a point of view, a very positive aspect, okay? Because its aim might be to balance or to fight against territorial inequalities, but beyond the limits of the Greater Paris Council area, we still have a big big scale of inequalities as well that we have to take into consideration, especially if the new dwellings are developed above the limits of the Greater Paris. 58. Hop. Yes, and as I told you, the National Assembly did vote last week the creation of this new Greater Paris Council. But today we are in 2015, and we will have a new general election in 1 year and a half, and perhaps in 1 year and a half we will not have spare time for implementing, okay, the administration of this new council. So this means that perhaps in 1 year and a half, this new council perhaps might gain or lose power, okay? It could become a very integrated metropolis, but it could also become a very empty administrative and political tool, okay? It will depend, obviously, of the results of the general election in 2017. Okay, it's very important. Up, and my third part and final part is about the two ways of approaching the regional development of the region Île-de-France. And I will speak of two urban development tools. The first one is about the Établissement Public Foncier Île-de-France, which is a tool of development, okay, which is adapted to the decentralization process, okay? Between the beginning of the 80s in France, we have a very powerful process of decentralization. This means that the state has decided to give its power in terms of urban development to the municipalities, okay? And this tool, EPFIF, does take into account this movement, this dynamic. Why? It is on the initiative of municipality to, if they have an urban project, obviously, to ask the help of this regional public real estate establishment, okay, which aims to do the so-called real estate carrying cost. This means that if you want to develop an urban project, your urban project obviously is developed on land, and the land has a certain amount of cost. It costs a huge amount of money most of the time, okay? So this EPFIF, first of all, does buy the land in the name of the municipality, and secondly, on average, it lasts between 5 and 10 years. It does carrying the land. It means that before the development, the real implementation of the project, most of the time you got 5 or 10 years of lapse time where nothing is happening, okay? But the municipality must own the land to develop its project, okay? So between the moment when the municipality or the EPFIF does buy the land and the real start of the project, you got this 5 or 10 years lapse of time, okay? And this lapse of time costs a lot of money because we have to take attention to the quality of the land. For instance, if people does live on, but without any permission on the land, it's obviously a problem because afterwards it costs money to put into good condition the land, to expel the people and so on, okay? So this carrying cost, the so-called carrying cost, are supported by this real estate establishment, okay? And this tool of real estate support, carrying cost, does work hand in hand, in a way, with municipalities, okay? And what is shown on the map is the partnership conventions between municipalities and the establishment, the real estate establishment. And what we can notice is obviously the main conventions are located within the area of the Greater Paris Council, okay? And also on the western part of Île-de-France, which is just along the Seine River, okay? So it shows, obviously, within 10 years, the next future urban development, okay? In 10 years, we know where the future urban developments will take place because we know that the regional public real estate establishment does work in those municipalities with the red dots, okay? And this tool, this establishment, is adapted in a way to the decentralization process, because it does buy the land for the municipalities, but based on the initiative of the municipalities. Okay, so this is important. This is a little example of what they are doing. For instance, here they just bought this part of land where where many things were demolished, renewed, and so on. And afterwards, they sold this land to the municipality, which afterward has developed a program of almost 400 dwellings and 6,000 square meters of activities, of economical activities. Okay, so this is its job. Okay, to buy some land to make it ready for developing projects led by municipalities. Okay, and many of them, okay, on the map here. Up. The second tool is called Grand Paris Aménagement, which is which is an agency, okay, a kind of big agency specialized in urban development. Okay, actually, they are making the city, they are developing new housing, dwellings, and so on. And this agency is very famous in France because it is the agency, the national state-led agency, which has developed the New Towns project. Okay, so in a way, it's a kind of old tool, okay, old development tool of the state. Okay, and this development tool, this agency, is going to be transformed in the next 6 months for developing new places and sites to develop the region and housing in a so-called housing mobilization plan. Okay, and this is not done at the initiative of the municipalities, okay, but it is done at the initiative of the state. Okay, so contrary to the evolution of decentralization that we know over the last 30 years, okay, the state does come back, okay, in the development matters, regional development matters, with its traditional tool, okay, saying, okay, you're not municipalities, you're not able to build up enough, let's say, dwellings, okay, so what we're gonna do is to develop new dwellings without your permission, okay? So we're going to impose, is it impose in English? To say, okay, we're going to order, we're going to build up without your permission, okay? We're going to build up what we want on your territory, okay? And this used to be the way that regional development did develop in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, okay? But it's no longer the situation. So with this tool called the Grand Paris Aménagement, what we may see within the next few years is the comeback, finally, the comeback of an old way of behaving by the state, okay? Saying, we are the state, we are going to build up in these areas without your permission, okay? Contrary to the établissement public foncier, okay, which is working at the initiative of the municipalities. Here we got the case of a big agency, very powerful one, which develop and implement its project on the initiative of the state, okay? And this is, I mean, this goes finally against the history of the decentralization process. Sorry. Sorry. Fichage. Up. And to conclude, what I want to underline is 3 points. As you may have understood, is that the issue of development of the Paris metropolis does exceed the scale of the metropolis. Okay. And the game between the scales, the regional, the municipality, and the metropolis one, is a very difficult game. And I don't know if we're going to succeed in getting the scales working with each other. The second point is the fact that we might have a regional and strategic planning system in Île-de-France, okay? But the main problem is that we don't have any longer a very strong country planning policy in France, okay? So we, on one hand, we got a strong strategic and regional planning policy in Île-de-France, but at the national scale, our country planning policy is fairly weak. So it doesn't match with each other. And finally, speaking of those two agencies, we see that the state, but also the municipalities, but mainly the state, doesn't really know how to implement its development policies. Shall we trust the municipalities and the land agency shows that sometimes the state say, okay, you're going to develop your land, your territory on your own initiative, okay? But in meantime, we got the development of this regional agency, of this urban agency, whose goals, okay, don't take and whose work don't take into consideration the need and perhaps not the need, but what the municipalities want on their territory. Okay, so you got those two tools. Okay, the opposition of two ways of doing some urban development. Okay, which underline the fact that the state doesn't know sometimes what to do. Shall I trust the municipalities, or shall I go beyond the power of the municipalities? There's a kind of tension, okay, within the state, to know how to implement a regional policy. And this is perhaps something that, well, I know that's different in Spain and in England, okay? In Spain, the regional policy implementation is led at the regional scale, okay? And the state is, okay, is quiet in its place. Whereas in England, the state is here. There's private initiatives and so the state is still very powerful, okay? Whereas in France, sometimes it does trust the municipalities' activity, and sometimes it does not. It's still balanced between one point and the other one. Okay, thank you. Merci beaucoup. I hope